Billionaire swore he would never love until the virgin maid made him tremble with just one smile. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She learned to disappear before she turned 15. Lena Carter moved through the marble hallways of the Hart mansion like morning mist, present but barely noticed, essential but never acknowledged. Her soft-soled shoes whispered against the imported Italian tiles, a sound so familiar that even the security cameras seemed to ignore her presence. At 24, Lena had perfected the art of invisibility. She could dust priceless sculptures without leaving fingerprints, arrange fresh orchids without disturbing their natural elegance, and clean crystal glasses until they sparkled like diamonds, all while remaining as unnoticed as the air itself. The mansion sprawled across 3 acres in Coral Gables, Miami's most exclusive neighborhood. Every room told a story of wealth accumulated through generations, but Lena knew only fragments, overheard phone calls, glimpsed newspaper headlines, the occasional raised voice behind mahogany doors. The owner, Brian Hart, was a ghost in his own home, 40 years old, worth more than most small countries and colder than the air conditioning that hummed constantly through the mansion's veins. Lena had worked there for 2 years, and their longest conversation had lasted exactly 12 seconds. Something about replacing the towels in the guest bathroom. She preferred it that way. Growing up in Liberty City, she'd learned that survival meant staying small, staying quiet, staying safe. Her grandmother had scrubbed floors in wealthy homes for 30 years, coming home each night with stories about families who lived like kings while treating their help like furniture. "Don't you ever think you belong in their world, baby girl?" Grandma Rose would say, soaking her swollen feet in a plastic basin. "Just do your job, take your money, and remember who you are." Lena remembered. Every morning at 6:30, she arrived at the service entrance, changed into her uniform, a simple grey dress that made her blend into the shadows, and began her routine. Kitchen first, then the living areas, finally the bedrooms. Brian was usually gone by 7, his black Maserati disappearing through the electronic gates like a sleek predator, returning to hunt. Today felt different, though she couldn't explain why. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric patterns across the marble floor. As she polished the banister leading to the 2nd floor, the house felt charged somehow, like the air before a Miami thunderstorm. "Excuse me." The voice made her jump, nearly dropping her cleaning cloth. She spun around, heart hammering against her ribs. Brian Hart stood 10 feet away, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw clean-shaven, his grey eyes unreadable. He looked like he'd stepped out of a boardroom and into her carefully ordered world. "I'm sorry," she whispered, automatically stepping aside. "I didn't know you were still here." "I can come back later." "No." The word came out sharper than he seemed to intend. He cleared his throat, his expression softening slightly. "I need to ask you something." Lena's mouth went dry. In 2 years, he'd never asked her anything except whether she'd seen his car keys or if the coffee was fresh. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had she broken something? Forgotten to clean a room? Overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear? "The dinner party last night," he continued, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the marble walls. "You stayed late to help with cleanup." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "You didn't have to do that. Mrs. Rodriguez could have handled it this morning." Lena twisted the cleaning cloth in her hands, unsure how to respond. The truth was she'd stayed because she needed the overtime money. Her little brother's asthma medication wasn't cheap, and her mother worked double shifts at the hospital just to keep their apartment in Liberty City. I wanted to help," she said quietly. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. He took a step closer, and she caught a hint of his cologne, expensive and masculine. "What's your name?" he asked. The question hit her like a physical blow. 2 years. 2 years of cleaning his home, washing his dishes, making his bed, and he didn't even know her name. "Lena," she whispered. "Lena Carter. Lena." He repeated it slowly, like he was testing how it felt on his tongue. "How long have you worked here?" 2 years, sir." His jaw tightened. 2 years, and I never—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair, the first imperfect gesture she'd ever seen him make. "I'm sorry. That's inexcusable." The apology hung in the air between them, unexpected and heavy with implication. Lena stared at him, searching for some sign that this was a test, a trap, a cruel joke, but his eyes held something she'd never seen before. Genuine regret. "Thank you," she said finally, because she didn't know what else to say. He nodded once, then turned toward the door. But just before he reached it, he stopped and looked back. Lena. Her name sounded different when he said it. Softer somehow. "Thank you. For last night. For everything." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Lena alone with her racing heart and 1,000 questions she couldn't answer. And for the first time in 2 years, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she thought. What made Brian Hart suddenly notice the woman who'd been cleaning his home for 2 years? And why did hearing her name seem to change everything? He couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd whispered her own name. Brian Hart sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of his investment firm, staring out at Biscayne Bay, without seeing the turquoise water or the yachts dotting the horizon. Instead, he kept replaying those 12 minutes in his foyer, the surprise in Lena's dark eyes, the way her voice trembled when she said, "Lena Carter," the impossible softness that had crept into his chest when she thanked him. It was ridiculous, dangerous even. "Mr. Hart?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 2 o'clock is here." Brian straightened his tie and forced himself back to the present. He'd built his empire by eliminating distractions, by keeping his focus laser-sharp on what mattered. Profit margins, market trends, the cold mathematics of success. Emotions were luxuries he couldn't afford, hadn't been able to afford since he was 12 years old, and his father's bankruptcy had taught him that feelings were just another way to lose everything. "Send them in," he said. But even as he shook hands with potential investors and discussed quarterly projections, part of his mind remained in that marble hallway, wondering why a woman he'd barely noticed for 2 years suddenly seemed to occupy every corner of his thoughts. Lena's hands shook as she folded laundry in the mansion's spotless utility room. The conversation with Brian had left her feeling exposed, like someone had suddenly switched on all the lights in a room where she'd grown comfortable, hiding in the shadows. She tried to focus on the familiar rhythm of her work, sorting, folding, organizing, but her mind kept drifting back to the way he'd said her name. No one had ever made her name sound like that before, like it was something worth remembering. "Girl, you look like you've seen a ghost." Lena turned to find Celeste Washington standing in the doorway, arms crossed and wearing the skeptical expression she'd perfected over 20 years of managing the Hart household staff. At 55, Celeste was built like her grandmother had been, sturdy, unshakable, with eyes that missed nothing and a tongue sharp enough to cut glass when necessary. "I'm fine, Mrs. Washington," Lena said, returning her attention to the white dress shirts she was folding. Each one probably cost more than her weekly salary. Celeste stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "And I'm Beyoncé. What happened?" Lena had learned not to lie to Celeste. The woman had a supernatural ability to detect deception, probably developed during her years raising 4 children as a single mother, while working her way up from house cleaner to head of staff. "Mr. Hart, he talked to me this morning," Lena said quietly. Celeste's eyebrows shot up. "Talk to you about what?" "He asked my name." The words felt strange leaving her lips. "He didn't know my name, Mrs. Washington. After 2 years. Honey, that man doesn't know any of our names except mine, and only because I make him sign my paychecks." Celeste settled her considerable frame against the folding table. "But something's got you all twisted up. What else?" Lena bit her lip, trying to find the right words. How could she explain the way Brian had looked at her, like he was really seeing her for the first time? How could she describe the flutter in her chest when his voice had gone soft, or the way her name had sounded different coming from his mouth? "He apologized," she said finally, "for not knowing my name, and he thanked me for staying late last night." Celeste was quiet for a long moment, studying Lena's face with the intensity of someone reading tea leaves. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Lena's stomach clench. "Baby girl, let me tell you something about rich men like Brian Hart. They're not like us. They live in a different world, play by different rules. And when they start noticing the help," she shook her head, "that's when things get complicated." "It wasn't like that," Lena protested, but even as she said it, she wasn't sure what it had been like. "He was just being polite." "Polite?" Celeste snorted. "That man has the emotional range of a refrigerator. He doesn't do polite unless it serves a purpose." She reached out and touched Lena's arm gently. "I'm not trying to scare you, sweetie, but I've been working for wealthy families since before you were born, and I've seen what happens when lines get blurred. It never ends well for people like us." Lena nodded. but Celeste's warning felt distant compared to the memory of Brian's gray eyes, the way they'd softened when he looked at her. Maybe she was reading too much into a simple conversation. Maybe she was letting her imagination run wild, because no one had ever looked at her the way he had this morning. "I should get back to work," she said, gathering up the folded shirts. "Lena," Celeste's voice stopped her at the door. "Just be careful, okay? Some bridges aren't meant to be crossed." That evening, Lena took the bus back to her apartment in Liberty City, watching Miami's skyline shrink in the window as gentrification gave way to her reality. The contrast never stopped jarring her. 8 hours in marble halls and crystal rooms, then home to peeling paint and sirens in the distance. Her phone buzzed as she climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. A text from her younger brother, Kieran. "Inhalers running low. Need refill by Friday." Lena closed her eyes and leaned against the concrete wall. Kieran's asthma medication cost $200 without insurance, and their mother's job at the hospital barely covered rent and groceries. The overtime money from last night's dinner party would help, but it wouldn't be enough. She let herself into the small apartment she shared with her mother, Iris, and found her passed out on the couch, still wearing her scrubs from her shift at Jackson Memorial. Lena grabbed a throw blanket from the back of their second-hand chair and gently covered her mother's sleeping form. At 24, Lena had never been on a date, never been kissed, never let anyone close enough to matter. She'd watched her mother sacrifice everything for her children, her youth, her dreams, her chance at love, and Lena had promised herself she wouldn't repeat that pattern. But as she stood in their tiny kitchen, making herself a dinner of rice and beans, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Brian Hart had said her name, like it mattered, like she mattered. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID made her heart skip. Hart residence. "Hello?" she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lena." Brian's voice came through the speaker, and she nearly dropped the phone. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "No, sir, not at all." She sank into one of their kitchen chairs, her knees suddenly weak. "I realized I never asked, do you need a ride to work? I know you take the bus, and with Miami traffic." The offer hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge. Lena stared out the window at the neon sign of the check-cashing place across the street, then closed her eyes. "That's very kind, Mr. Hart, but the bus is fine." "Brian," he said softly. "Just Brian." And in that moment, Lena realized that Celeste had been right about one thing. Things were definitely getting complicated. The coffee was waiting for her when she arrived the next morning. Not just any coffee, a steaming cup from Zara's, the boutique cafe in Coconut Grove, that charged $12 for what most people called a simple latte. Lena stared at it, sitting on the kitchen counter, still warm, with her name written in elegant script across the white paper cup. Lena, not staff or cleaning lady, or any of the dismissive labels she'd grown used to. Just her name, in careful handwriting that somehow made her feel seen. A small note lay beside it, written on expensive stationery. "Thank you for everything you do, Papi." Her hands trembled as she picked up the cup. No one had ever bought her $12 coffee before. Hell, she'd never even bought herself $12 coffee. The warmth seeped through the paper into her palms, and she felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Hope. Well, well, well. Lena spun around to find Celeste standing in the doorway, her dark eyes taking in the scene with the precision of a detective examining evidence. "Morning, Mrs. Washington," Lena said, trying to keep her voice casual. Celeste approached the counter, her gaze fixed on the coffee cup. "Fancy coffee from Zara's." Personal note. "Your name spelled right." She looked up at Lena with raised eyebrows. "Honey, when was the last time that man remembered to eat lunch, let alone buy coffee for the staff?" "It's just coffee," Lena whispered, but even she didn't believe it. "Just coffee," Celeste repeated slowly. "From a man who has his assistant order everything, including birthday presents for his own mother." She shook her head. "Baby girl, that man drove to Coconut Grove himself this morning, before 7 a.m., to buy you coffee." The realization hit Lena like a physical blow. Brian had left his house, driven 20 minutes through Miami traffic, waited in line at an expensive cafe, and written her name on a cup for her. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Before Celeste could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Brian appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed in a navy suit that made his gray eyes look like storm clouds. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "Good morning," he said, his gaze immediately finding Lena's face. I hope you like vanilla lattes." The question hung in the air like a prayer. Lena clutched the cup tighter, feeling the weight of Celeste's stare and the intensity of Brian's attention. "I do," she said softly. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "I wanted to." The words came out rushed, like he was afraid he might lose his nerve. "You work so hard and I realized I should have been more appreciative." Celeste cleared her throat pointedly. "I should check on the gardening crew," she announced, though they all knew the gardeners didn't arrive until 10. She paused at the door, giving Lena a meaningful look before disappearing into the hallway. Suddenly the kitchen felt impossibly small. "I should let you get to work," Brian said, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he lingered, his eyes scanning Lena's face like he was memorizing it. "Mr. Hart." "Brian," he corrected gently. "Please, Brian." His name felt foreign on her tongue, intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. "I don't understand what's happening here." For a moment, vulnerability flashed across his features, so quick she almost missed it. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "Neither do I." The honesty in his admission made her breath catch. Here was Brian Hart, billionaire investor, master of control and calculation, admitting he was just as confused as she was. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," he continued, "about how I didn't even know your name after 2 years. It made me realize how much I've missed." "Missed?" He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of late nights and early mornings. "You, Lena. I've missed seeing you. Really seeing you." The words should have thrilled her. Instead, they terrified her, because Celeste had been right. Men like Brian Hart lived in a different world, and women like her always got hurt when they forgot that. "I should go," she said, moving toward the door. "I have work to do." "Lena, wait!" His voice stopped her, and she turned back to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Would you like to have dinner sometime?" The question hit her like a lightning bolt. Dinner. He was asking her to dinner. "I can't," she said automatically, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Why not?" "Because you're Brian Hart and I'm nobody. Because this is your house and I'm your employee. Because I've never been on a date in my life and wouldn't know how to act in your world. Because my brother needs medicine and my mother works double shifts and I can't afford to lose this job over some impossible fantasy. Because it's complicated," she said instead. Something shifted in his expression. Disappointment, maybe, or understanding? He nodded slowly. "I get it. I do." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "But Lena." "Yes, complicated doesn't always mean impossible." That afternoon, Lena found herself cleaning Brian's home office, a room she usually avoided because he worked from home on Wednesdays. But today he was at his downtown office, and she needed to dust the expensive books that lined his mahogany shelves. She was running her cloth along the spine of a leather-bound first edition when she noticed the framed photograph on his desk. It showed a younger Brian, maybe 12 or 13, standing next to a tall man in a rumpled suit. The boy in the picture was smiling, genuinely smiling in a way she'd never seen on the adult Brian's face. "That's my father." Lena jumped, nearly knocking over a crystal paperweight. Brian stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, his suit jacket slung over his arm. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't hear you come in. I can finish this later." "It's fine." He entered the office, setting his jacket on the back of his chair. "You're just doing your job." But there was something in his voice, a heaviness that made her look at him more closely. His shoulders seemed weighed down by invisible burdens. "He looks happy," she said quietly, nodding toward the photograph. Brian picked up the frame, studying the image with tired eyes. He was. Before everything fell apart, he set it down carefully. "He taught me that happiness was a luxury I couldn't afford." The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Lena found herself wanting to say something, anything, to ease the pain she heard in his voice. "Maybe he was wrong," she said softly. Brian looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw past the billionaire facade to something vulnerable and achingly human. "Maybe he was," he agreed quietly. Then, after a pause, "Have you changed your mind about dinner?" This time, instead of running, Lena met his gaze. "Ask me tomorrow," she said. And for the first time since she'd known him, Brian Hart smiled. She didn't sleep that night. Lena lay in her narrow bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a butterfly if she tilted her head just right. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mrs. Valdez's television playing telenovelas, the dramatic music mixing with the distant hum of traffic on Northwest 7th Street. "Ask me tomorrow." The words had tumbled out of her mouth before her brain could stop them. What had she been thinking? Brian Hart, billionaire, sophisticated, probably dated supermodels and socialites, was asking her to dinner. Her, Lena Carter, who'd never owned a dress that cost more than $30, and whose idea of fine dining was the Chinese place that delivered to Liberty City. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from her best friend, Dacia, who worked nights at Jackson Memorial as a nursing assistant. "Girl, you've been weird all week. Spill." Lena stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain what was happening when she didn't understand it herself? Dacia had known her since high school, had seen her turn down every guy who'd ever asked her out, had watched her build walls so high that even friendship sometimes felt like a risk. Just work stuff. "Talk tomorrow?" "You better. And bring details." Lena set the phone aside and closed her eyes, but sleep remained elusive. Every time she started to drift off, she saw Brian's face, the way his expression had softened when she'd mentioned his father, the genuine smile that had transformed his entire face when she'd said, "Ask me tomorrow." By morning, her decision was made. Brian arrived at his office at 6 a.m., 2 hours earlier than usual. He'd spent most of the night pacing his penthouse, alternating between hope and self-recrimination. What was he doing? Lena worked for him. The power dynamic alone made any relationship ethically questionable, and yet he couldn't shake the memory of her voice when she'd said his name. Couldn't forget the way she'd looked at that photograph of his father with such gentle understanding. His assistant, Waverly, found him at his desk at 7:30, surrounded by untouched financial reports and empty coffee cups. "Rough night?" she asked, setting fresh coffee and his morning schedule on the desk. At 45, Waverly Knox had been with the company for 8 years and had seen Brian through enough all-nighters to recognize the signs. "Something like that?" he muttered, pretending to study a document he'd already read 3 times. "Want to talk about it?" Brian looked up at Waverly's concerned face. She'd been more than an assistant over the years, part therapist, part protective older sister, part voice of reason when his workaholic tendencies threatened to consume him entirely. "Hypothetically," he said carefully, "if someone in a position of authority developed feelings for someone who worked for them—" "Hypothetically," Waverly interrupted with a knowing smile, "that someone should probably examine their motives very carefully and maybe consider whether those feelings are mutual before doing something stupid." "Thanks for the advice," Brian said dryly. "Any time, boss." She paused at the door. "But hypothetically, everyone deserves a chance at happiness. Even workaholics who haven't taken a real vacation in 6 years. Lena found the second coffee waiting for her when she arrived at the mansion. Another cup from Zara's, this time with a cinnamon roll from the bakery next door. The note was shorter today. "Good morning, Pausby." She was still holding the note when Brian appeared in the kitchen, looking slightly rumpled and more nervous than she'd ever seen him. His usually perfect hair showed evidence of restless fingers, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd slept about as well as she had. "Morning," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Thank you for the coffee," she said softly, "and the cinnamon roll. You really don't have to keep—" "I know." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. "I want to." The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. She thought about Celeste's warnings, about the impossible gulf between their worlds, about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Then she thought about the vulnerability in his voice when he talked about his father, about the way he'd written her name so carefully on that coffee cup, about the smile that had lit up his face when she'd given him hope. "You wanted to ask me something," she said. Brian's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "Lena, would you have dinner with me? Not here, not at some fancy restaurant where you'd feel uncomfortable. Somewhere simple, somewhere we could just talk." The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they were brave enough to cross. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why what? Why me? You could have anyone. Models, socialites, women who belong in your world. Why the cleaning lady from Liberty City?" Pain flashed across his features. "Don't do that. Don't diminish yourself." "I'm not. I'm being realistic." "Then let me be realistic too." He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "For 15 years, I've lived my life like a machine. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. I built walls so high I forgot there was a world outside them. And then you smiled at me in that hallway, and for the first time in decades, I remembered what it felt like to be human." Lena's breath caught. "Brian, I know this is crazy. I know all the reasons it's a bad idea. But Lena, I can't stop thinking about you. The way you move through the world so quietly, like you're afraid to take up space. The way you care for everything around you, this house, your family, everyone but yourself. His hand moved as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. You make me want to be better than I am. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever seen her the way he was describing. No one had ever made her feel like she was worth seeing. I've never been on a date, she whispered. The admission should have embarrassed her, but Brian's expression only grew more tender. Neither have I, he said quietly. Not a real one. Not one that mattered. She stared at him. This powerful man who commanded boardrooms and managed billions of dollars, confessing his own inexperience with something as simple as a meaningful dinner. Where would we go? She asked, and she knew that in asking the question, she was already saying yes. Relief flooded his features. There's this little diner in Homestead, Orlando's place. Nothing fancy, just good food and honest conversation. Would that be okay? Orlando's place. She knew it. A family-run restaurant where her grandmother had sometimes taken her as a child. The kind of place where the waitresses called you honey and the pie was homemade, and no one cared what you wore or how much money you had. Yes, she said simply. Brian's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. Really? Really? She felt her own smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. But I have one condition. Anything. We go Dutch. I pay for my own meal. He started to protest, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he nodded slowly, understanding that this was about more than money. It was about dignity, about meeting him as an equal, even when everything else in their lives said they weren't. Deal, he said. Saturday night? Saturday night. As Brian headed toward the door, he turned back one more time. Lena? Yes? Thank you for giving us a chance. After he left, Lena sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd done it. She'd said yes to Brian Hart. Now she just had to figure out how to survive her first date without completely falling apart. You said yes to what? Dacia Williams nearly dropped her chocolate croissant as she stared at Lena across the small table at Café Luna, their usual Saturday morning spot in the design district. Her dark eyes were wide with disbelief, her perfectly styled locks framing a face that cycled through shock, concern, and something that might have been excitement. It's just dinner, Lena said weakly, stirring her coffee for the 10th time. At Orlando's place. Just dinner. With your billionaire boss, who you've been cleaning up after for 2 years. Dacia leaned forward, lowering her voice. Girl, are you out of your mind? Lena had been asking herself the same question for 3 days. Ever since she'd said yes to Brian, every rational part of her brain had been screaming warnings. What did she know about dating? What would they even talk about? What if she embarrassed herself? Maybe, she admitted quietly. Dacia's expression softened. She'd known Lena since they were 16, had watched her friend build walls so high that even the nicest guys at school had eventually given up trying. In 8 years, Dacia had never seen Lena show interest in anyone. Tell me about him, she said gently. Not the rich part, the real part. Lena thought about Brian's smile when she'd given him hope, the way he'd looked at that photograph of his father, the coffee he'd bought her, with her name written so carefully. He's lonely, she said finally. Really lonely, like me. And he sees me. Not the uniform, not the job. Me. She looked up at Dacia, her eyes bright with unshed tears. No one's ever seen me before, Dash. Dacia reached across the table and squeezed Lena's hand. Then you go on that date, honey. But you be smart about it. What do you mean? I mean you remember who you are. Lena Carter from Liberty City, who's been taking care of everyone else her whole life and never learned to take care of herself. Dacia's voice was firm but kind. Don't you dare shrink yourself to fit into his world. If he really sees you, then he better love what he sees, all of it. Meanwhile, across town, Brian was having his own crisis of confidence. He stood in his walk-in closet, staring at row after row of expensive suits, and wondering what the hell someone wore to a casual dinner at a family diner. Everything he owned screamed money and privilege, the opposite of what he wanted for tonight. His phone rang, interrupting his fashion paralysis. The caller ID made him groan. Quinton Reeves, his business partner and closest thing to a best friend. Hart Industries, Brian speaking, he answered automatically. It's Saturday, you workaholic. Why do you sound like you're having an existential crisis? I have a date tonight. The silence on the other end lasted so long that Brian checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. I'm sorry, what? Quinton finally managed. Did you just say you have a date? You? Mr. Emotions are for weak people. Very funny. Who is she? Please tell me it's not another ice queen from the country club. Remember Anastasia Hartwell? That woman could freeze hell over with a glance. Brian winced at the memory. He'd dated Anastasia briefly 2 years ago. If you could call their sterile dinner conversations and strategic public appearances dating, she'd been beautiful, accomplished, and completely uninterested in anything beyond his bank account. She's not like that, Brian said quietly. She's different. Different how? She works for me. Another long silence. Brian, Quentin's voice carried a warning. Please tell me you're not about to become a sexual harassment lawsuit waiting to happen. It's not like that, Brian said quickly. God, Quentin, she's extraordinary. Kind and strong and real in a way I'd forgotten people could be. And I'm terrified I'm going to screw this up. Wow, Quentin's tone shifted. You're really falling for this woman. I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't been on a real date since college. And even then, it was all networking and family expectations. How do you talk to someone you actually care about? The same way you've been talking to her already, I'd guess. If she said yes, it's because she likes who you are when you're with her. Brian looked at his reflection in the closet mirror. Expensive haircut, designer everything. The armor he'd built around himself over 15 years of ruthless business dealings. What if she realizes I'm not worth it? Then she's not as smart as you think she is, Quentin said simply. But Brian, don't show up as the CEO tonight. Show up as the man who cares enough to be scared. At exactly 6:30, Brian sat in his car outside a small apartment complex in Liberty City, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He'd opted for dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, the most casual clothes he owned. Still, he felt overdressed for the neighborhood around him. The building was older, paint peeling in places, but the small garden out front was carefully maintained with bright flowers and neat hedges. Someone cared about this place, tried to make it beautiful despite its limitations. His phone buzzed. A text from Lena. I'll be down in 5 minutes. Brian got out of the car, suddenly second-guessing everything. Should he go up to her door? Was that too presumptuous, too formal? Before he could decide, she appeared in the building's entrance, and every thought fled his mind. She wore a simple navy dress that brought out the warmth in her brown skin, her hair styled in soft waves that framed her face. She looked nervous but beautiful, like someone who'd taken care with her appearance but hadn't tried to become someone else. Hi, she said softly as she approached the car. Hi. He moved to open the passenger door for her, then stopped. Is this okay? I can drive, or we could take separate cars if you'd be more comfortable. Brian. Her voice stopped his rambling. It's okay. I trust you. The simple words hit him harder than any business deal he'd ever closed. She trusted him. This woman who had every reason to be cautious, who lived in a world where trusting the wrong person could cost you everything, trusted him. As they drove toward Homestead, the initial awkwardness began to fade. They talked about Miami traffic, about the radio station, about anything except the fact that they were both terrified and excited in equal measure. I haven't been to Orlando's in years, Lena said as they pulled into the parking lot of the small diner. My grandmother used to take me here when I was little. What was she like? Brian asked, turning off the engine. A soft smile crossed Lena's face. Strong. She cleaned houses her whole life, like my mother does now, but she never let anyone make her feel small. She used to tell me that dignity wasn't something other people could give you or take away. It was something you carried inside yourself. Brian studied her profile in the dim light of the parking lot. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. Lena turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his chest tight. She would have liked you. What makes you say that? She always said the measure of a man wasn't in his wallet, but in how he treated people who couldn't do anything for him. Lena's voice was quiet but steady. You bought me coffee and asked my name. That matters more than you know. Before Brian could respond, she was getting out of the car, leaving him to follow and wonder how someone so young could be so wise about things that had taken him 40 years to understand. As they walked toward the diner's warm, welcoming lights, Brian realized that this wasn't just his first real date. It was the first night of the rest of his life. The smell of home-cooked food and fresh coffee wrapped around them like a warm embrace as they stepped into Orlando's place. The diner hadn't changed since Lena's childhood. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floors, and walls covered with faded photographs of local high school football teams and family celebrations. A jukebox in the corner played soft salsa music, and the gentle hum of conversation created the kind of atmosphere that made strangers feel like friends. Lena Carter, a woman in her 60s, approached them, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her brown eyes bright with recognition. She wore the uniform of Orlando's, a simple black dress with a white apron, but carried herself with the dignity of someone who'd spent decades making people feel welcome. "Mrs. Esperanza," Lena said, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "I can't believe you remember me." "Remember you? Mija, you used to come here with Rosa every Saturday for 3 years. You always ordered the same thing, grilled cheese and chocolate milk." Esperanza Morales pulled Lena into a gentle hug before turning curious eyes toward Brian. "This is Brian," Lena said, her voice carrying only the slightest tremor of nervousness. "Brian, this is Mrs. Esperanza. She's been here since I was 8 years old." Brian extended his hand, and Esperanza shook it with the firm grip of someone who'd worked with her hands her entire life. Her eyes assessed him with the sharp intelligence of a woman who'd seen every type of person walk through her doors. "Brian, eh? Any friend of Lena's is family here." She gestured toward a corner booth. "Come, I'll give you the best table in the house." As they settled into the worn vinyl seats, Brian looked around with genuine curiosity, rather than the polite discomfort Lena had expected. He studied the photographs on the walls, the hand-lettered specials board, the way the evening light filtered through the simple curtains. "This place has soul," he said quietly, and something in Lena's chest loosened. "My grandmother always said you could tell everything about a person by how they treated waitresses, and whether they appreciated places like this," she replied. "Smart woman." Brian picked up the laminated menu, then looked at her with a smile that made her stomach flutter. "What do you recommend?" "The Cuban sandwich is incredible, and Mrs. Esperanza makes the best tres leches cake in Miami." "Then that's what I'll have." Esperanza returned with 2 glasses of water and a basket of warm bread. "So what brings you 2 lovebirds to my restaurant?" "We're not," Lena started, but Brian's gentle voice interrupted. "It's our first date," he said simply, and the honesty in his admission made Lena's cheeks warm. Esperanza's eyebrows shot up with interest. "First date at your age?" She looked between them with grandmotherly concern. "How old are you two?" "I'm 24, Lena said. "And Brian's 40 and apparently a slow learner when it comes to asking out beautiful women," Brian finished, earning a delighted laugh from Esperanza. "Aye, better late than never, mijo. But you treat this girl right, you hear? Rosa raised her to be special." After Esperanza left with their orders, and comfortable silence settled between them, Brian reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of Lena's hand. "Is this okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, and he gently took her hand in his. His skin was warm, his touch careful, like he was handling something precious. "I have to ask you something," Lena said, gathering her courage. "Why now? Why me? You could have anyone." Brian was quiet for so long she wondered if she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "When I was 12, my father lost everything. The business he'd built, our house, his reputation. I watched him crumble, watched my mother leave because she couldn't handle being poor. I swore I'd never let emotions make me that vulnerable." Lena squeezed his hand gently, encouraging him to continue. "I built walls so high that I forgot there was a world outside them. Work became everything, the only thing. I convinced myself I was happy." He looked up at her, his gray eyes intense. "Then you smiled at me in that hallway, and I realized I'd been living like a ghost for 15 years. Brian, let me finish," he said softly. "You asked why you. The answer is simple. You're real, Lena. You're kind without expecting anything in return. You see beauty in small things, the way you arrange flowers, the care you put into everything you do. You make me remember what it feels like to be human." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what? Of this? Of you? Of hoping for something I can't have." She pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. "We live in different worlds, Brian. You have billions of dollars and I take the bus to work. You went to Harvard Business School, and I never went to college. What happens when you realize I'm not enough?" The pain in her voice seemed to physically hurt him. He leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Lena, listen to me. I don't care about any of that. You should. Everyone else will. I don't give a damn about everyone else." His voice rose slightly, drawing a few glances from other diners. He lowered it, but the intensity remained. "Money can't buy what you have. Education can't teach the kind of wisdom your grandmother gave you. And class? Real class is how you treat people, how you move through the world with grace and dignity despite everything you faced." He reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. "You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who works 2 jobs to help her family, who turns down overtime she needs because her friend needs someone to talk to. I see someone who makes $12 coffee taste like heaven because you wrote a thank you note for it. I see strength and beauty and a heart so pure it makes me want to be worthy of it. Brian, I'm falling in love with you, Lena. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back for days. I know it's too soon, I know it's crazy, but I needed you to know. The confession hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they were brave enough to cross. Lena stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. I've never been in love before, she whispered. Neither have I, not really. She looked into his eyes and saw her own fear reflected back, mixed with hope and vulnerability that took her breath away. I'm falling too, she admitted quietly, and it terrifies me. Brian's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. Good, he said softly, because if this is going to work, we need to be equally terrified. Esperanza chose that moment to arrive with their food, taking one look at their joined hands and tear-bright eyes before setting down their plates with a satisfied nod. Now that's what I like to see, she said with a wink. Young love, even if you're not so young anymore, mijo. As they laughed together, really laughed, the kind that comes from relief and joy and the pure happiness of being understood, Lena realized something had shifted between them. The walls were coming down, brick by careful brick, and for the first time in her life she wasn't afraid of what lay on the other side. The text came at 3 in the morning, jolting Lena from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. Kieran in ER. Can't breathe? Come now. Her mother's words sent ice through her veins. Lena was out of bed and pulling on clothes before she was fully awake, her hands shaking as she called for a rideshare to Jackson Memorial Hospital. The emergency room was a familiar chaos of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. Lena found her mother, Iris, pacing in the waiting area, still wearing her hospital scrubs from her own shift. Her dark skin was ashen with worry, her usually neat hair disheveled from running her fingers through it. Mom, what happened? His inhaler ran empty yesterday. I meant to pick up the refill today, but I got called in for a double shift and forgot. Iris's voice cracked. He woke up wheezing, couldn't catch his breath. I called 911. Guilt crashed over Lena like a wave. The money for Kieran's medication. She'd been planning to handle it this week, but between her confusion over Brian and the emotional whirlwind of their date, she'd let it slip. Where is he now? Room 3. They're giving him a breathing treatment, but Lena... Iris grabbed her daughter's hands. They want to keep him overnight for observation. The insurance won't cover it all. The number hung unspoken between them. $3,000. Minimum. Money they didn't have, couldn't borrow, couldn't conjure from thin air. We'll figure it out, Lena said, though she had no idea how. Let me see him. Kieran looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, the nebulizer mask covering half his 17-year-old face. His dark eyes lit up when he saw her, though he couldn't speak through the treatment. Hey, baby brother, she said softly, taking his hand. You scared us. He squeezed her fingers weakly, and she saw the apology in his eyes, as if his asthma attack was somehow his fault. Don't you dare blame yourself, she whispered. This is on me. I should have gotten your prescription filled. Her phone buzzed. A text from Brian. Good morning, beautiful. Thank you for last night. It was perfect. Last night felt like a lifetime ago. The confession of love, the hope that had bloomed in her chest, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she deserved happiness. Now reality was crashing back down with brutal efficiency. She couldn't text him back. How could she explain that while he was probably sipping expensive coffee in his marble kitchen, she was watching her little brother struggle to breathe because she'd failed him? Lena Carter! She looked up to see Dr. Amara Okafor approaching, clipboard in hand. Dr. Okafor had treated Kieran before, a kind woman with gentle hands and eyes that had seen too much suffering to waste time on judgment. How is he? Stable. The nebulizer treatments are helping, but I want to keep him for observation. His oxygen levels dropped dangerously low. Dr. Okafor's voice was professional but compassionate. This could have been much worse. I know. It won't happen again. Lena, I have to ask, is there a reason his prescription lapsed? Financial difficulty? The question was asked kindly, but it still felt like a knife to Lena's chest. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Let me see what I can do about samples, but long-term we need to find a solution. Kieran's asthma is severe. Missing medication isn't an option. After Dr. Okafor left, Lena sank into the plastic chair beside Kieran's bed and buried her face in her hands. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her like a physical thing. Her mother worked herself to exhaustion just to keep them afloat. Her brother needed medication to literally breathe, and here she was, daydreaming about billionaires and impossible love stories. Her phone rang. Brian. She stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the decline button, but something made her answer. Hello? Lena? You sound upset. What's wrong? The concern in his voice almost broke her resolve. I can't talk right now. Why? What happened? My brother's in the hospital. I have to go. Which hospital? I'll come. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. Brian, you can't. This isn't your world. Lena, if you need help, I don't need your money, she said quickly, though the words tasted like ash, because she did need it. Kieran needed it. But accepting it would change everything between them, would make their relationship something transactional and wrong. That's not what I meant. I just want to be there for you. You can't fix this, she whispered. Some things money can't solve. Let me try. The simple offer, spoken with such gentle certainty, made her chest ache. Part of her wanted to say yes, wanted to let him sweep in and make all their problems disappear with a swipe of his platinum card, but that would make her just another charity case, another problem for him to solve. I have to go, she said. I'll call you later. She hung up before he could respond, then immediately turned off her phone. She couldn't handle his kindness right now, couldn't bear the temptation of letting him save them. Brian stared at his phone, Lena's words echoing in his mind. This isn't your world. He'd spent the morning replaying every moment of their date, the way she'd laughed at his stories, the soft admission that she was falling for him too, the way her hand had felt so right in his. He'd started planning their next evening together, had even considered how to introduce her to his life properly. Now he was confronting the brutal reality he'd been naive enough to ignore. Their worlds weren't just different, they were incompatible. While he worried about stock prices and quarterly reports, she was watching her brother fight for breath in an emergency room. While he bought $12 coffee without thinking, she was choosing between medication and meals. He called Waverly. I need you to find out everything you can about Jackson Memorial Hospital's billing department, he said without preamble. Specifically, policies about anonymous payments. Brian, what's going on? Someone I care about is in trouble. I need to help, but it has to be done carefully. How carefully? So carefully that she never knows it was me. There was a pause. This is about the woman you had dinner with last night, isn't it? Waverly, I've worked for you for 8 years. I've never seen you care about anything except work. If this woman makes you want to help people anonymously, she must be pretty special. Brian closed his eyes. She is. But she's also proud. If she knew I was paying her brother's hospital bills, she'd never forgive you. Exactly. Then we'd better be very, very careful. By evening, Kieran was stable and sleeping peacefully. The doctors had agreed to discharge him in the morning, but the financial cloud still hung over them like a storm waiting to break. Lena was dozing in the uncomfortable chair when a nurse gently shook her awake. Miss Carter, there's been a development with your brother's account. Lena's heart sank. More charges, probably. What kind of development? Well, it seems there was an error in our system. Your brother's treatment is covered under a hospital charity care program. The social worker wanted to speak with you about it in the morning, but I thought you'd want to know tonight. You won't be responsible for the bill. Lena blinked, sure she'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? The charity program. Sometimes patients qualify without realizing it. Your account's been cleared. After the nurse left, Lena sat in stunned silence. Charity care. She'd never applied for any program, had never heard of automatic qualification. Her phone, forgotten in her purse since the morning, showed 17 missed calls and 12 text messages, all from Brian. With shaking hands, she turned it back on and listened to his voicemails. His voice grew progressively more worried with each message. Lena, please call me back. I'm worried about you. I know you don't want my help, but I can't stop thinking about you and your brother. I'm going crazy not knowing if you're okay. Please, just let me know you're safe. The last message was barely a whisper. I know you think our worlds don't fit together. Maybe you're right. But I need you to know that you've become my whole world. Whatever's happening, we'll figure it out. Together. As Lena listened to his voice, raw with emotion and genuine care, a terrible suspicion began to grow in her mind. The sudden appearance of charity care, the convenient timing, Brian's 17 phone calls. If her suspicion was right, everything had just become infinitely more complicated. She was waiting for him when he arrived home Monday evening, Lena stood in the marble foyer of the Hart mansion, still wearing her grey uniform, her dark eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and fury that made Brian's stomach drop. In her hands, she held a manila folder. Hospital paperwork, he realized with growing dread. "We need to talk," she said, her voice deadly quiet. Brian loosened his tie, buying himself a few seconds to think. He'd known this moment would come, had hoped against hope that maybe his carefully orchestrated charity care would go unnoticed, long enough for him to figure out how to tell her the truth. "Lena, let me explain." "Explain what? How you lied to me? How you went behind my back and paid my brother's hospital bills after I specifically told you not to?" She held up the folder. "Did you think I was too stupid to figure it out? That's not $3,000, Brian. Donated anonymously to Jackson Memorial's Charity Care Fund at exactly 9:47 a.m. on Sunday morning, 43 minutes after I hung up on you." Her voice cracked slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "The billing department was very helpful when I pressed them for details." Brian ran a hand through his hair, the careful composure he'd maintained in boardrooms for 15 years, crumbling under the weight of her disappointment. "I was trying to help. You were trying to control." Lena took a step closer, and he could see the tears she was fighting not to shed. "Do you have any idea what this feels like? To have the man you're falling in love with decide you're a charity case?" "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Her voice rose, echoing in the vast space. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you decided I was too poor, too helpless to handle my own family's problems." "Lena, please. I trusted you." The words came out as barely more than a whisper, but they hit him like a physical blow. "Saturday night, when you asked why I was scared, I told you it was because I was afraid you'd realize I wasn't enough, and you said you didn't care about any of that." "I don't care." "But you do." She slammed the folder down on the marble table, the sound sharp and final. "Because the first time my real life got messy, the first time you saw what poverty actually looks like, you couldn't handle it. You had to swoop in and fix it like some kind of savior." Brian felt something breaking inside his chest. "I couldn't stand the thought of you suffering when I had the power to help. That's exactly the problem." Lena's voice was steady now, but tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "You saw my suffering as something you needed to fix instead of trusting me to handle it myself. Your brother could have died, Lena. His oxygen levels were dangerously low. If he'd had another attack without his medication..." "You think I don't know that?" She wiped at her tears angrily. "You think I haven't been carrying that guilt every day since I was 16 and my father walked out? I've been taking care of my family longer than you've been making billions, Brian. I know what's at stake." He took a step toward her, then stopped when he saw her flinch away. "I was going to tell you," he said quietly. "I just needed time to figure out how." "When, after we slept together? After you proposed? When exactly did you plan to mention that our entire relationship was built on you seeing me as someone who needed saving? That's not what this is. Isn't it?" Lena's laugh was bitter. "The poor cleaning lady and the rich businessman. He falls for her simple charm. She's grateful for his generosity. It's a fairy tale, Brian, and fairy tales aren't real." The accusation hung between them like a sword. Brian stared at her, seeing his own worst fears reflected in her eyes. Was that what he'd done? Had he unconsciously cast her as some kind of Cinderella figure to his Prince Charming? "You're right," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I handled this wrong. I should have talked to you first, should have respected your decision even if I disagreed with it. But Lena, what I feel for you, that's real. That's not charity or pity or some savior complex. How can I tell the difference?" She shook her head, backing toward the door. "How can I trust my own feelings when I don't know if you're falling for me or for some idea of who you think I am?" "Because I see you," he said desperately. "The real you. Your strength, your courage, the way you carry yourself with dignity, even when the world tries to diminish you. I fell in love with Lena Carter, not some fantasy, but you still couldn't let me handle my own problems." The simple truth of it stopped him cold, because she was right. He'd seen her family crisis and immediately moved to solve it, never questioning whether that was what she wanted or needed from him. "I don't know how to love someone without trying to protect them," he admitted quietly. "My father lost everything because he was too proud to ask for help. I watched it destroy our family. When I saw you hurting..." "You saw your father," Lena finished, understanding flickering across her features. "You weren't trying to save me. You were trying to save him." The insight cut deep, exposing wounds he'd thought were long healed. "Maybe. I don't know anymore." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of hurt and misunderstanding filling the space between them. "I can't do this," Lena said finally. I can't be in a relationship where my partner makes decisions about my life without talking to me first. Even if those decisions come from love. Lena, I need time, space, to figure out who I am when I'm not worried about whether you're going to swoop in and rescue me from my next crisis. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. The money goes back, she said without turning around. Every penny. I'll work extra shifts, sell whatever I need to sell, but I won't take your charity. It wasn't charity. Then what was it? Brian searched for the right words, but they wouldn't come, because maybe it had been charity, in a way. Maybe his need to fix her problems was just another form of the control that had driven his life for so long. I love you, he said instead, the words raw and desperate. Lena's shoulders sagged slightly. I know, and I love you too, but sometimes love isn't enough. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Brian alone in his marble palace with the echo of her words and the devastating realization that in trying to save her, he might have lost her forever. Outside, Lena sat in her car for a long time, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She'd meant every word she'd said, but that didn't make walking away any less agonizing, because the truth was, part of her had wanted to take his help. Part of her had wanted to lean into his strength and let him carry her burdens for a while, and that scared her more than anything else. 3 weeks passed without a word between them. Brian threw himself into work with the desperate intensity of a drowning man clinging to a life raft. 18-hour days became his norm, conference calls at dawn, business dinners that stretched past midnight. Anything to avoid the empty mansion that still smelled faintly of her perfume, still echoed with the memory of her voice. Waverly found him at his desk at 2 in the morning on a Thursday, his laptop screen casting blue shadows across his haggard face. This has to stop, she said, switching on the office lights. Brian didn't look up from the quarterly reports he'd been staring at, without really seeing for the past hour. I'm fine. You're surviving on coffee and stubbornness. When's the last time you ate a real meal? I had a sandwich yesterday. Yesterday was Tuesday. It's now Friday. Waverly crossed her arms. Talk to me, Brian. What happened with Lena? The sound of her name hit him like a physical blow. He'd instructed the household staff never to mention her, had Celeste handling the cleaning rotation, so he wouldn't have to see the space she'd occupied in his life. She left, he said simply. People don't just leave when they're in love. What did you do? Brian finally looked up, and Waverly was shocked by what she saw. His usually sharp grey eyes were dull with exhaustion and something deeper, a bone-deep loneliness that no amount of success could fill. I tried to save her, he said quietly. And I lost her instead. Meanwhile, Lena was learning what it meant to rebuild a life piece by careful piece. She'd taken a second job at Paloma's bakery in the mornings before her shift at the mansion, a job that meant leaving her apartment at 4 a.m. and not returning until after 8 p.m. The extra money would slowly pay back what Brian had spent on Kieran's hospital bills, though at minimum wage. It would take her nearly 6 months. Mija, you're going to work yourself into the ground, said Paloma Vega, the bakery's 60-year-old owner, as she watched Lena glaze donuts with mechanical precision. When's the last time you smiled? Really smiled? Lena shrugged, not trusting her voice. The truth was she hadn't smiled, really smiled, since she'd walked out of Brian's mansion 3 weeks ago. She'd done the right thing, she told herself daily. She'd maintained her dignity, her independence. So why did she feel so hollow inside? There's a man, Paloma continued, her intuitive brown eyes reading Lena's face like an open book. There's always a man when a woman stops smiling. It's complicated. Love usually is. Paloma moved to stand beside her, their hands working in companionable rhythm. You want to tell me about him? For a moment, Lena considered it. Paloma had that gift some older women possessed, the ability to listen without judgment, to offer wisdom wrapped in warmth. But how could she explain Brian? The way he'd looked at her like she was something precious, the way he'd made her feel seen for the first time in her life, the way he'd shattered her trust with good intentions. He thought he was helping me, Lena said finally, but it felt like he was trying to fix me instead. Ah, Paloma nodded knowingly. The savior complex. Some men, they love the idea of rescue more than they love the woman. That's what I thought too, but, Lena paused, her hands stilling on the donuts. But what if I was wrong? What if he really was just trying to help and I was too proud to let him? Mija, pride and dignity aren't the same thing. Dignity is knowing your worth. Pride is being too stubborn to accept love when it's offered imperfectly. The words hit Lena like a revelation. Was that what she'd done? Had she let pride masquerade as dignity? The revelation came to Brian during a board meeting about hospital philanthropy. The Heart Foundation's charitable giving has increased significantly this quarter, reported Thaddeus Monroe, their head of corporate social responsibility, particularly in healthcare initiatives. Brian barely listened as Thaddeus detailed their various donations, his mind wandering, as it did constantly these days, to coffee-colored eyes and a smile that had once made him feel human. The Jackson Memorial Program has been particularly successful, Thaddeus continued. Anonymous donations totaling $50,000 this month alone. It's allowed them to expand their charity care program significantly. Something in Brian's chest tightened. 50,000? I thought we only donated 3,000 to Jackson Memorial. Oh, that's just from your personal account, sir. The foundation's contribution was separate, part of our broader healthcare initiative. Brian stared at the presentation slides, but his mind was reeling. He'd been so focused on his own $3,000 donation that he'd completely forgotten about the foundation's much larger contribution to the same hospital. If Lena had discovered the bigger donation, if she thought he'd lied about the amount— "Excuse me," he said abruptly, standing from the conference table. "I need to make a call." Lena was leaving Paloma's when her phone rang. Brian's name on the screen made her heart stutter, but she answered anyway. "Hello, Brian." "Lena, thank God. I've been trying to work up the courage to call you for weeks." His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. "I need to see you. There's something you need to know about the hospital donation." A chill ran down her spine. "What about it?" "It's more complicated than I told you. The $3,000 wasn't the only money that went to Jackson Memorial. My foundation donated $50,000 to their charity care program the same month, but I swear to you, I didn't connect the two until today." Lena sank onto a bus stop bench, her legs suddenly weak. $50,000? "Brian, what are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that I may have inadvertently funded your brother's care twice, once intentionally and once through a program I'd forgotten about entirely. And I'm telling you that if you think I've been lying to you about the scope of my interference, have you been lying to me?" "No, but I've been an idiot." His voice carried a weight of exhaustion and regret. "Lena, I need to see you. I need to explain, and I need to ask your forgiveness for more than just the money." "Brian, I've been thinking about what you said, about me trying to control your life, about not trusting you to handle your own problems. You were right. I was so afraid of losing you the way my father lost everything that I became exactly what I was afraid of, someone who takes away choice." Lena closed her eyes, feeling the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. "Where do you want to meet?" she asked quietly. "Wherever you feel safe. This is your choice, Lena. It always should have been." An hour later, they sat across from each other at Café Luna, the same place where Lena had confessed her fears to Dacia weeks ago. Brian looked terrible, hollow-eyed and thin, like he'd been punishing himself. "I've been paying therapist," he said without preamble. "Dr. Lucinda Reyes. She's helping me understand some things about myself." "What kind of things?" "That my need to control everything, including your problems, comes from watching my world fall apart when I was 12. That I've been so afraid of helplessness that I became someone who takes away other people's agency." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup like it was an anchor. "She helped me realize that loving someone means trusting them to make their own choices, even when those choices scare you." Lena studied his face, seeing genuine change in the vulnerability he was showing her. "I owe you an apology," she said softly, "for walking away without giving you a chance to explain or change, for assuming the worst about your motivations. You don't owe me anything. I broke your trust. But I could have fought for us instead of running away. Paloma, she owns the bakery where I work now. She told me there's a difference between dignity and pride. I think I let pride convince me that accepting help from someone who loves me makes me weak." Brian leaned forward slightly. "And now? Now I think maybe we were both scared kids trying to protect ourselves from getting hurt." She met his eyes. "The question is, are we brave enough to try again?" "I want to be, but only if you're sure. I don't want to pressure you or make you feel like you have to say yes because of the money situation or—" "Brian," her voice stopped his nervous rambling. "Do you love me? More than anything in the world. Do you trust me to know my own mind? To make my own choices? To tell you when I need help instead of you deciding for me?" "Yes, I want to. I'm learning to." Lena reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the familiar warmth of his skin against hers. "Then ask me again." "What?" "Ask me to dinner again like you should have 3 weeks ago." A slow smile spread across Brian's face. the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since their fight. "Lena Carter, would you like to have dinner with me?" "Yes," she said simply. "But this time we're splitting the check." His laugh was pure relief and joy. "Deal. But I get to choose the restaurant. As long as it's not somewhere I need a loan to afford the breadsticks." "I was thinking Orlando's place," he said softly, "if that's okay with you." Looking into his eyes, seeing the man who was willing to learn how to love her better, Lena felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 weeks. Hope. "It's perfect," she said. 2 months later, on a warm Miami evening, Lena stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing down the simple black dress she'd bought with her own money. Tonight felt different. Brian had been mysterious about their dinner plans, asking only that she meet him at 7 o'clock at an address he'd texted her. When she'd looked it up, she'd discovered it was a small community center in Coconut Grove, not exactly their usual dinner destination. Her phone buzzed. Dacia, as always, had impeccable timing. "You look beautiful, by the way. Stop overthinking." "How do you know I'm overthinking?" "Because I've known you for 8 years, and you always overthink when you're happy." "Text me after, okay? I want details." Lena smiled, pocketing her phone. These past 2 months had been a revelation. She and Brian had taken things slowly, rebuilding trust brick by careful brick. They'd established new rules. No financial help without discussion. No major decisions made unilaterally. Complete honesty even when it was uncomfortable. It hadn't always been easy. There had been moments of doubt, small arguments, the inevitable growing pains of 2 people learning to love each other better. But through it all, Lena had felt something she'd never experienced before. The security of being truly known and loved anyway. The rideshare dropped her off in front of a modest building with warm light spilling from its windows. As she approached, she could hear soft music drifting from inside. Not the salsa or pop she'd expected, but something classical and romantic. Brian was waiting for her by the entrance, wearing dark slacks and a white button-down shirt, his hair slightly tousled by the evening breeze. When he saw her, his face lit up with the smile that never failed to make her heart skip. "You look incredible," he said, taking her hands in his. "Thank you. But Brian, what is this place? I thought we were going to dinner." "We are. But first I want to show you something." He gestured toward the building. "This is the Esperanza Community Center. It opened last month." Lena's breath caught. Esperanza, like Mrs. Esperanza from Orlando's. Her granddaughter, actually. Marisol Esperanza Cruz. She's a social worker who wanted to create a space for families in this neighborhood. After-school programs, job training, health screenings. The kind of place that gives people opportunities instead of just handouts. As they walked inside, Lena saw children doing homework at colorful tables, while their parents attended what looked like a computer class in an adjacent room. The walls were covered with artwork and photographs, celebrating the community's diversity and strength. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but why are you showing me this?" Brian stopped in front of a wall display titled Community Heroes. Her breath caught when she saw a familiar face smiling back at her. Mrs. Esperanza from the diner, surrounded by photos of other local residents who'd made a difference in their neighborhoods. "Because," Brian said quietly, "this is what loving someone really looks like. Not writing checks to solve problems, but investing in solutions that empower communities to solve them themselves." He turned to face her, his gray eyes intense with emotion. "Lena, you taught me that love isn't about rescuing someone. It's about believing in them so completely that you give them space to rescue themselves. This center exists because I learned that lesson from you." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Brian, let me finish," he said gently. "I've spent the last 2 months learning how to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Learning to ask instead of assume, to support instead of control, to trust your strength instead of trying to shield you from everything." He reached into his jacket pocket, and Lena's heart stopped as he pulled out a small velvet box. "But there's one more thing I need to ask you, and this time I want to do it right." To her surprise, he didn't drop to one knee. Instead, he remained standing, holding the box between them like an offering. "I'm not going to kneel," he said with a soft smile, "because this isn't about me asking you to be rescued or swept off your feet. This is about me asking you to be my partner, my equal, my teammate in building a life together." He opened the box to reveal not a massive diamond that would have screamed his wealth, but a simple, elegant ring with a single stone that caught the light beautifully. "Lena Carter, I love your strength, your independence, your fierce loyalty to the people you care about. I love the way you see beauty in small things and dignity in honest work." I love that you make me want to be a better man, not by changing me but by believing I already am one. Lena's tears flowed freely now, but she made no move to wipe them away. I'm not asking you to marry my money or my status or the life I can give you. I'm asking you to marry me. Brian, the man who falls asleep to the sound of your laughter and wakes up grateful that you choose to love him back. He took a shaky breath. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me where we make decisions together, face problems together, and love each other exactly as we are? For a moment, the only sound was the distant laughter of children and the soft music floating from the center's main room. Lena looked at this man who'd learned to love her better, who'd built a community center instead of just writing checks, who was offering her partnership instead of rescue. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Brian Hart. I'll marry you. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit, she realized, because he'd paid attention to details that mattered rather than assumptions about what she should want. As he pulled her into his arms, Lena felt the final wall around her heart crumble completely. This was what love looked like when it was built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. This was what happened when two people chose to grow together instead of trying to change each other. I have one condition, she murmured against his chest. Anything. The wedding planning, we do it together. Every decision, every choice. No surprises, no matter how well-intentioned. Brian's laugh rumbled through his chest. Deal. But I get to have one surprise. What? The honeymoon destination. But only if you promise to trust me. Lena pulled back to look at him, seeing in his eyes the man who'd learned that trust was earned through consistent action, not grand gestures. I promise, she said, because I know now that when you say you love me, you mean all of me, even the stubborn, independent parts that don't need rescuing. Especially those parts, he said softly, and kissed her as the community center's warm light surrounded them like a blessing. Outside, Miami's skyline glittered in the distance, but Lena had never felt more at home than she did in this moment, not because Brian had given her a fairy tale, but because he'd given her something better, a love built on truth, respect, and the promise that they would face whatever came next as true partners. Later, as they walked hand in hand toward Orlando's place for a celebration dinner with Mrs. Esperanza's blessing and the ring-catching streetlight on her finger, Lena realized that sometimes the best love stories weren't about being saved. They were about two people brave enough to save themselves and strong enough to choose each other anyway. Ready for forever? Brian asked as they reached the diner's warm, welcoming door. With you? Lena smiled, feeling more ready than she'd ever been for anything in her life. I'm ready. And as they stepped inside together, the scent of home-cooked food and the sound of familiar laughter welcoming them, both knew that their real story was just beginning. 2 years later, the morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of their modest home in Coral Gables, casting golden patterns across the breakfast table where Lena sat grading papers. She'd finished her teaching degree the previous spring, funded not by Brian's money, but by a scholarship she'd earned through her work with the Esperanza Community Center. Mrs. Hart, came a sleepy voice from the doorway, and Lena's heart still skipped at the sound of her married name. Brian stood there in rumpled pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair sticking up at impossible angles, looking nothing like the polished billionaire the business world knew. Good morning, Mr. Hart, she replied with a smile, setting down her red pen. Coffee's fresh. He padded over to kiss the top of her head, a ritual they'd maintained since their wedding day 18 months ago. It had been a simple ceremony at Orlando's place. Mrs. Esperanza had insisted on catering, and half the community center's families had attended, alongside Brian's bewildered but charmed business associates. Kieran called, Brian said, pouring himself coffee. His scholarship interview at University of Miami went well. He thinks he nailed the chemistry questions. Lena beamed. Her little brother, now 19 and asthma-free, thanks to better medication and management, was pursuing pre-med studies. The scholarship he was interviewing for? One of dozens funded by the Hart Foundation's education initiative, a program Brian had developed with Lena's input and the community's needs in mind. Nervous? Brian asked, settling into the chair across from her. About what? Today, the grand opening. Lena's stomach fluttered with anticipation. After 2 years of planning, fundraising, and construction, the second Esperanza Community Center was opening in Liberty City, in the very neighborhood where she'd grown up. Unlike the first center, this one would offer something special, a scholarship program for working adults to complete their education, along with childcare and job placement services. It had been Lena's idea, born from her own struggles to balance work and school. But bringing it to life had been a true partnership, her understanding of community needs combined with Brian's business acumen and connections. A little, she admitted. What if people don't come? What if we misjudged what the neighborhood needs? Brian reached across the table to take her hand, his wedding ring catching the morning light. Then we'll adapt. That's what partnerships do. They evolve. The word partnership still made her heart warm. It had become their defining principle, applied to everything from deciding which movies to watch to making major business decisions. Even their home reflected it, not the mansion Brian had initially assumed she'd want to live in, but this comfortable house they'd chosen together, with a garden Lena tended and an office where Brian worked remotely 3 days a week. Besides, he continued with a grin, Dacia's been promoting it at the hospital for weeks. If she says people will come, people will come. Lena laughed. Dacia had indeed become the center's unofficial marketing director, spreading word through her nursing network about educational opportunities for healthcare workers wanting to advance their careers. Her friend had also become Brian's unlikely champion once she'd seen how completely he'd changed from the controlling man Lena had first described. "Your mother's coming today, isn't she?" Lena asked. Brian nodded, his expression softening. His relationship with his mother, Vivian, had been slowly healing over the past 2 years. She'd been skeptical of Lena at first, not because of race or class, but because she'd watched her son build walls for so long that she'd feared anyone who might tear them down. Now she was one of Lena's fiercest supporters and had even volunteered to help with the center's mentorship program. "She wants to meet Paloma," Brian said, something about exchanging bread recipes. The image of his elegant mother and the earthy bakery owner bonding over baking techniques made Lena smile. Their world had become beautifully complicated, filled with people from different backgrounds united by genuine affection and shared purpose. Her phone buzzed with a text from Celeste. "Everything's ready at the center. Marisol's here, the ribbon's up, and I've got 3 dozen of Paloma's pastries. Stop worrying and get down here." "Time to go?" Brian asked, reading her expression. "Time to go." As they drove through Miami toward Liberty City, Lena reflected on how much had changed. The scared, invisible girl who'd once cleaned Brian's mansion was now a married woman, a teacher, a community leader. But the transformation hadn't happened because someone had rescued her. It had happened because someone had believed in her enough to let her rescue herself. "Nervous?" she asked Brian as they pulled into the center's parking lot, already bustling with cars and families. "Terrified," he admitted. "What if I say the wrong thing? What if people see me as just another rich guy trying to buy goodwill?" Lena squeezed his hand. "Then you'll be honest about your mistakes. Listen more than you talk. And remember that you're not here to save anyone. You're here to serve." He smiled at her, love and gratitude shining in his grey eyes. "How did you get so wise?" "I married a man who makes me braver than I thought I could be." The ribbon-cutting ceremony was everything they'd hoped for, and more. The crowd was diverse. Families from the neighborhood, healthcare workers interested in the scholarship program, local business owners, and even some of Brian's corporate colleagues who'd become genuine supporters of the community work. Lena stood at the podium, looking out at faces that reflected her own journey, people working hard, dreaming big, needing not charity but opportunity. "This center exists because I know what it's like to have dreams that feel impossible," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I know what it's like to work multiple jobs while trying to better yourself. I know what it's like to want more for your family, but not know how to get there." She paused, finding Brian's face in the crowd. He was standing next to her mother, Iris, who wore a proud smile and the new dress she'd bought for the occasion. "But I also know what's possible when someone believes in your potential enough to help you unlock it, not by doing the work for you, but by creating opportunities for you to do the work yourself." The applause was warm and sustained, but Lena barely heard it. She was thinking about the girl she'd once been, afraid to take up space, convinced she wasn't worthy of love or success or dreams coming true. After the ceremony, as families toured the new classrooms and Brian discussed scholarship applications with prospective students, Lena stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. "Pretty good turnout," came a familiar voice. She turned to find Quinton approaching, Brian's business partner who'd become a genuine friend to both of them. "Better than we hoped," she agreed. "Thank you for helping with the legal work. I know this isn't exactly your usual corporate law. Are you kidding? This is the most rewarding work I've done in years. He paused, watching through the window, as Brian patiently explained program requirements to a young mother holding a toddler. You know, I've known Brian for 8 years, and I've never seen him this happy. Really happy, not just successful. He's taught me what love looks like when it's built on respect instead of rescue, Lena said softly. And you've taught him that being vulnerable doesn't make you weak, Quentin smiled. It's been something to witness. As evening approached and the crowd began to thin, Lena found herself back in the center's main room, watching Brian help stack chairs while chatting easily with volunteers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dacia. Watching you two work together is like watching a masterclass in partnership. When are you giving me nieces and nephews to spoil? Lena blushed, tucking her phone away. She and Brian had talked about children, carefully, honestly, as they discussed everything. They both wanted a family, but they were taking their time, building their marriage and their work first. Ready to go home, Mrs. Hart? Brian appeared at her elbow, slightly sweaty from chair stacking but glowing with satisfaction. Almost. She turned to face him fully, this man who'd learned to love her not as a savior, but as a partner. I want to remember this moment. The way you look right now, surrounded by people whose lives are going to change because of what we built together. What we built, he repeated, pulling her close. I like the sound of that. As they locked up the center and walked to their car under Miami's star-filled sky, Lena realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories weren't about dramatic rescues or fairy tale endings. They were about two people who chose every single day to love each other better than they had the day before. They were about building something meaningful together, brick by careful brick, choice by conscious choice. What are you thinking about? Brian asked as they drove through the city that had raised her and now embraced them both. Just this. Us. How we went from impossible to inevitable. He reached over to take her hand, their wedding rings clicking softly together. You know what I love most about our story, he said quietly. What's that? It's not finished yet. And as they headed home to their chosen life, their earned love, their partnership built on truth and respect, and the daily decision to choose each other, Lena smiled. Because he was absolutely right, their story was just beginning. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about being completed by someone else. They're about choosing to grow alongside someone who sees your worth and believes in your dreams. What did you think of Lena and Brian's journey? Could you see yourself being brave enough to love someone who challenged you to be better? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.